everybody. Welcome back to Bob and Chad live again tonight. Another exciting episode. Got a little racing in over the weekend, got a little rain in over the weekend. Definitely where I was at here at home, the weather was really good. We didn't have very good weather, very bad weather. But some of the racetracks definitely had some weather issues, which is pretty typical of this fall. And I think you went to Deer Creek, Chad, and said that they got rained out.
Yeah, we got Thursday night in on the Jamboree, which is now going to be, I think, the spring Jamboree instead of the fall Jamboree. So I think they're going to move it to the spring, which kind of sucks. That's one of my favorite races of the year, and Deer Creek's always exciting. And the track was really good for Thursday night, and we were just starting to test some new products. So it sucks to get rained out, but I guess at the end of the day, I needed a day off anyway. So it was Saturday. A rain out was kind of nice to catch up on some sleep, I guess, after a couple weeks running pretty hard. But yeah, so we're working hard towards the next. We're not sure where we're going. We were planning on going to the USA Nationals, but with our rigs being all messed up, I think we're going to stock up Carl Performance. Carl Chevrolet is going to be there doing trackside support, so they're going to handle the Wehrs machine side of it for us there at the USA Nationals. So that's pretty cool of them.
Yeah, well, that sounds pretty good. No, where's that at again?
The USRA Nationals are at Wheatland, Lucas Oil
Speedway.
Oh,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I should have known that. Yeah, I should have. Don't know what I was thinking. Yeah. Well, I think I kind of got back into a little bit of a hobby. I used to be a big fanatic on camera guy, and ever since I was a kid, I always liked photos and doing that kind of stuff. So I bought some used stuff on eBay that's a little bit more current than what my stuff was that I had, because the stuff that I had was good equipment. It's just way out of date. And so I spent Saturday putting a bunch of stuff on eBay and buying a bunch of stuff on eBay. The only thing is I know what I bought compared to what I'm selling. It's not going to balance.
Never does.
So I'm like, damn. And of course you get tied into one of them deals, and sure as heck you get to bidding on something, and oh well. But that was fun. So that was kind of my weekend. I went to the park yesterday with my two granddaughters or grandchildren, grandson and granddaughter, Bobby's kids. Took some pictures, and so I had a pretty relaxing weekend. It was pretty cool.
Awesome.
They raced at Harlan. They didn't have a real great modified count, but I know their sport mod count was pretty good. And I think they raced at Columbus Junction. Other than that, that's about all I know about. It's kind of winding down. And I'm actually looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to kind of getting wound down and taking a couple 3 weeks, and then start with the chassis school stuff. And Joel wants us to come back out there really bad. And I don't know. I'm thinking about it, but not real strong.
Yeah, it's a long ways from the Midwest.
I mean, I like those customers and all that stuff. It's just, I just hate to admit that I'm not quite as young as I used to be for some of that traveling stuff. And my patience with that stuff probably isn't what it used to be either. So, well, it never was really good. But anyway. Okay, we got a couple questions here. Brady, what is the advantage of running a left front chain limiter on a Wissota street stock? Well, the advantage of running the chain limiter, if it's legal in Wissota, is the fact that you restrict how much the left front can come up. When the left front, when weight transfers, weight will automatically go to the right rear. sometimes we want to restrict that weight to the right rear because you get to the point where you're lifting that left front too high and the car's rolling on the right rear too much. What happens is it's rolling off the left rear, and especially with that stock suspension, we need to keep as much left rear in the car as we can. And so by putting a chain on that, a chain limiter on that left front, it allows us to set how much we want that chain, how much we want that car to move on the left front before it actually lifts the left rear or the left front wheel off. Which the left front wheel, you're looking at about 75 pounds is what it's going to be lifting. So when the car goes to transfer to the right, it transfers to a point, but then it stops. And when it stops, or when the left front comes to a stop, it loads the left rear more and actually gets the car more traction up off the corner. Now, once again, it's like everything that we do. A little is good. Sometimes too much can be a disadvantage because you can tighten it down too much and lose some side bite in the right rear too. So it just kind of depends. But that's the advantage of running. It'll give you more traction off the corner. Do the spring cable on the front and rear have to match 1 inch, 2 inch difference? No, not really, because the way the spring table is set on those cars, we still drop it down, and I like to make it match with the cups, but it just kind of depends on what you're actually doing. With a modified, it's a lot easier than it is like a sport mod or a B mod well, even with a B mod, it's a lot easier. But anything that's got fixed rear suspension where the springs have to be in a certain location, it's a little bit more difficult. But if I could match them, I probably would. But I can't say that it makes a tremendous amount of difference as long as you have some split between the left front and the right front, left rear, and right rear. What's your opinion, Chad?
Yeah, I don't know if they necessarily match all the time. Like you said, there's so many differences in the rear suspension and spring heights and spring tables and chassis manufacturers where they build the coilover hookups. It's sometimes hard to get the back where you want it. The front's a little bit easier to manipulate with standard spring heights and then the drop cup versus the standard cup. And we actually, at Super Nationals there, debuted our medium cup. So we did an in-between. Sometimes the 2.5 drop is too much on the front. It makes too much motion for some cars, depending on the roll center. That the roll center and the spring table kind of work together there on the corner entries. So tuning the spring tables very important, I think. But do you have 2 inches in the front and 2 in the back? I don't think necessarily, but if you can get it that way, I like to have at least 1 to 2 inches on the front and the back.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that the way the cars are rolling over in the right front, we used to have problems with them rolling over in the right front. Well, now with all the other things that we've done and the way the pull bars work and everything else, we're getting to the point where the front end, they're actually rolling too much. So that medium cup that you come out with, I think is going to be a good deal. Because we actually even went back to a standard cup on a couple cars just because they were rolling on the right front so hard. We had to do something. I didn't want to increase spring rate because that's not really fixing the problem. That's just putting a Band-Aid on the problem. And so I think you're right. It's very important. Ron, so the way cars are built now, as to before, computers and now, how do you all determine where the roll center is when the car is being built? And what's the process to find when building a new car? Oh boy, Ron, that's a great question. Don't know if I can answer it, to be honest with you. We still statically look at the roll center in a static situation or in a with the car setting at right heights. And then what we try to do is we kind of try to determine how much it rolls. The thing is, believe it or not, the roll center used to be a pretty big deal. In today's world, I don't know if there's as much focus on the roll center. It's more about having it left to right than it is how high it is. Because normally with the modifieds and the stuff that we build, your roll center is kind of in that 4-inch range, no matter what you really build, unless you really do some really weird stuff with the front end. But moving it right to left, by different size ball joints on the upper left or upper right ball joint, lower ball joints, will move it that way. And so that's about the best I can answer that question, not being too technical and too boring here. Aaron, what is the difference when these chassis builders are building their own birdcage versus like Wehrs or BSB or other manufacturers?
Well, I would say if they're building their own, they just want to be a little bit different and want to build the part themselves, and that creates more revenue for them. And if they have welders that need to be welding stuff together, for the most part, I brought a cage plate with just for my other show and tell project later. But for the most part, I mean, pretty much everybody's a 9-inch spread on the cages, 4.5 up, 4.5 down, pretty basic. We all start kind of in the same realm. Then it's determined by how many adjustments you want up and down. I get criticized all the time for having too much adjustment, which there's a time and a place for everything. We've been in all the holes, and we've had plates made with more holes. So a lot of it is if they're building their own cage, they probably have 1 or 2 holes, and they want to be able to tell the customer that you're in either hole A or hole B. What I did when we started these cages is we looked at, we were welding together in a one piece, and my brother would go out and destroy the car almost weekly. So you're taking that whole cage off and throwing it away, basically. So that's when we started building the modular stuff where we had bolt together. Well, we started with one whole plate bolted together as one piece. You still had to take the hub assembly off and everything off to get it apart. Well, we built a split plate for Burkhofer on the late models where the top and bottom were 2 different pieces. And then we realized how cool it was to replace the parts, and that's kind of the evolution of our cage. But for the most part, the 4.5 up, 4.5 down is a basic spacing that everybody uses. We're like 5.5 off the center line, which is pretty normal. Late models are closer to the center line, so that just manipulates the speed of the cage. I think pretty much everybody has got 1/2-inch shock adjustments on their shock mounts. So I just wanted to build a cage that every chassis manufacturer could put on their car and get the numbers of what they wanted to achieve in their rear suspension. That's why the modular stuff that we designed is what we were shooting for there, is to have easy fix and ease of creating cool. I mean, we take cages, bolt different stuff together, and guys have some harebrained ideas. And with the modularity of it, that's what makes it so easy to, if somebody has a vision, we can achieve it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I know that's worked well for us this year. We did quite a bit of experimenting on the left rear, different heights and different locations for the shock and things like that. And it was nice just to be able to get a piece that could be bolted on and adjusted. So it's so much easier. We don't have the facility to actually build our own type of stuff, and you guys do such a good job of building it. It's just a lot easier because you have it on the shelf. Johnny, I'm having an issue with bounce on my right rear of my Eco Modified from the center of the corner through the exit. It starts as soon as I apply the throttle. This is a lift arm car. I've checked everything for a bind. Drive shaft is not bottoming out. J-bar doesn't seem to change. I do not run a chain on the right rear. Any ideas of where to start? I'll tell you what, that has been a struggle. That right rear bounce in some cars, it can be a struggle, and I wished I had a complete fix-all answer. We got to the point where, we even a couple cars, we actually we have lower rails that are bolted in, and we even actually took the rails out of it, thinking that maybe the car was too rigid. I wish I had an answer for you, Johnny, but It used to be the fact that people would run their chain too tight, but if you're not running a chain, that's not it. And the shock usually doesn't create a bounce unless you're running a real drastic split shock, like a 3/8 or something like that. That can actually get to a point where it can actually create a bounce, like a standard 4/5 or 3/5 or something like that doesn't seem to really create a bounce. Wished I had a better answer for you. I'm not doing good at answering these questions tonight. That's just a struggle.
I don't know if an EcoMod is a 4-link car or if it's a 2-link car.
I don't know.
If it's a 4-link car, I would spin the cages. If the cages are bound up, it could be binding on the cages. But I'm not sure if it's a 4-link or a clamped up 2-link car.
Anthony wants to know what my opinion would be on a 7-degree versus a 10-degree taper on the ball joints. I actually don't have an opinion on that, to be honest with you. I really don't have an opinion one way or the other there. What's your thoughts on coilover behind the left rear on an IMCA modified? Well, coilover behind definitely gives you traction off the corner. It definitely has more forward traction off the corner. The problem is getting it controlled on corner entry like you would like it to, because without the shock in front, when you get into the corner, it can unload, and you have to have such a stiff axle damper shock to kind of restrict that movement. Then all of a sudden you kind of get that axle dampener that's sticking the right rear extra hard, and so it kind of creates some issues on corner entry. But usually once you're back to the mid corner and under the throttle, the car will have more traction off the corner. It's just corner entry's a little bit more of a challenge with that deal. You really have to let the car roll. You can't muscle the car as much, with that spring behind on the left rear. Chuck, on front springs on a modified, what's the advantage of a heavier spring on the left or right? It tends to, the cars in today's world seem to like that heavier spring on the left, equal springs or heavier spring on the left. With us doing things like putting that spring behind the housing on the coilover on the left rear, we need to do some things to kind of help the car be tighter getting into the corner, because we lose some of that when you put all that load. When you got 2 inches of load in that left rear spring, you lose a little bit of right rear feel. So sometimes we've got to go to a stiffer left front spring to keep the right rear loaded to get more side bite, and that seems to work the best. A stiffer right front, there's a few chassis builders that still do that, not near as many as there was, but the stiffer right front is more traction off. It rolls the corner. When you get into the corner, it frees the car up because you get off the throttle, and it doesn't dump on the right front so much. It unloads the left front, which in turn takes side bite out of the right rear. Would moving the pull bar forward on both sides, what would it do, moving the pull bar forward on both sides? I don't really think you're going to see a tremendous advantage to it on a sport mod where you have a solid bar. I think still, we still run ours. I think it's 2 inches ahead of center. And that just gets it to the point where when we get a lot of roll steer with that left rear walking clear up underneath the car and the right rear kind of moving back, we want to make sure that it never goes past 0. So we always start with on our sport mods 2 inches in front of the housing. Johnny says 4-link cages are bind free.
Yeah, I don't know what it would be then.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean,
If the rear end, if the rear end is bent and the axle's kind of wobbling, is the rear end square?
well, and that's another thing, depending on what axles you're running, sometimes, you can get, situations where we're running some of those axles that twist a little bit more. That could possibly do it. But that's a tough one. Like I said, I've got a couple customers that we've fought that. We've changed shocks. We've changed everything under the sun. And I don't know. We finally got rid of it at the end of the year. And to be honest with you, I don't know if I asked for what we actually finally fixed on the car. To be honest, I was just so glad that the guy said that it didn't bounce that I never had a chance to ask. In fact, I was, yeah, I won't go there. I was starting to question where the bounce really was at. But needless to say,
You missed Jason.
I missed Jason. I did miss Jason. A quick explanation of how to use the load stick to get load numbers on the front of a modified. Have load numbers and shock eye to eye from the chassis builder. Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, so is your video free on your race tech with Bobby doing that? Or do you got to be a member?
I think that's on the paid one.
Paid one. Okay, yeah. We have a YouTube video that explains it pretty in depth on how to do it, but the best way and the most consistent way that we found to do it is to take the car. Once you're scaled, you have your center to center. If your chassis builder gave you your center to centers and what the load would be, then you just take the front tire wheel off, put the stick on, go to that center to center, and then you'll have a reading. You zero the stick before you put it on. You'll have a reading at your center to center, which is basically your static ride height load. That's going to be your benchmark that you're going to tune off of. So once you get that benchmark set, then you can take the load stick, and when you change springs, if you go from a 400 to a 450 or something like that, you just change the spring, put the stick back on, go to the center to center, wind the screw jack up until the load is the same, and then you know that your ride height and your load on that corner are perfect, so you can go right to the speedway and not have to worry about the car being off. So it lets you change springs very quickly. The other thing that we use it for is checking your down numbers, so your max load at your max travel, which you go out on the racetrack, and we usually paint the shock shaft with a Sharpie and go out and make a run on the speedway, and then you look at either the dust ring or the Sharpie line. You don't go off the shock rubber because pulling on the racetrack or hitting a rut is going to manipulate that. So you'll look at the dust ring or the Sharpie mark, and then have a couple of your homeboys push down on the front of the car until you get to that point. Take that center to center distance, and then you can put the car in the air, put the stick on, and then go to that number, and that'll be like your dynamic load. So your static ride height number and your dynamic number are the two you're going to tune basically for each racetrack. So the load stick has really been an awesome tool to get data from a racetrack or a night. You win the feature and you don't know what you had, so you can put the stick on and get that down data and know why you were so good that night based on the track. So when you come back 2 months down the road and you've been tuning on your hot rod and you're out to lunch, you can go back to the stick number, go back to the center to center, and if you're 100, 200 pounds off or whatever, that could help you tune back into what you were when you were really good at that racetrack. So the load stick is just a device to gather data and really tune your car and have information on your front setup to make you better.
Awesome. Do you have any new products you want to show us tonight, Chad?
I did. I brought a new product. We melted the internet a little bit ago because my boys in the marketing team, I should have probably checked their picture, but they posted a picture of our new tube clamp, but it was just basically on a suspension tube. And everybody was wondering why you didn't just use this hex. So the evolution of all these products for this suspension tube is like this. So when you have a Heim in a double shear plate, you can't get to this nut very easily with a wrench to adjust it. So after making about 15 prototype wrenches that failed, we came to this, which is our tube jam nut, which moves the hex outside of your chassis or your suspension cage double shear so you can get to the hex on that nut. Well, then the problem is if you run that on both ends, on the chassis side and the cage side, you basically have covered up this hex, and then you got a vice grip. Or you can use this new little clamp that Billy Steinberg's idea, our engineer, and it fits the same 1.25" wrench that you use on this jam nut. So then you can have a wrench on this and a wrench on that to loosen that up. So, and the reason we don't want to go in here and put wrench flats back in the middle of the tube is snap, crackle, pop failure. So that's kind of the evolution of all these things and gadgets. And we had some pretty cool comments there when they posted that without the 450 on it. But if you run the suspension tube jam nuts on both ends, you can't get, on the hexes. So then that's what replaces that. So I know it's a lot of gadgets for one suspension tube, but it's all a carte. You either run what you want, don't run any of it, or run all of it. So
Cool. Yeah, that's a pretty slick deal. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Adam, an IMCA stock car, 175 16-inch left rear and a 225 right rear. When setting the car, do you go by the right heights on the rear axle or do you go by the scale numbers? Well, actually, you need to go by both. And that actually brings us to another question. I had a listener email me today that wanted to know if we would go over the proper procedure to scale a car. And so this would be a good time to actually do that. First thing, and I kind of wrote some notes down, so if I look away from the computer, I'm just reading my notes. The first thing I always do is set the air pressure and tire stagger. I always recommend trying to set my race car up with 2 inches of stagger in the rear and 1 inch in the front. Now, if you're one of the guys that likes to run 1 inch of stagger in the rear, then use the stagger that you normally race at. But whatever you do, make sure that you use, when you do this again, always use the same stagger so that the stagger is not a variable. Then you set the car on the scales, and you align the front end, and you make sure that, or before you actually put it on the scales, you align the front end and make sure the front end's lined up. Then I set the car on the scales, and the next thing I do is I make sure I set my ride heights so that my ride heights are correct. And now I might have some real goofy numbers on scale numbers, but I'm okay with that. I set the ride heights, get the ride heights set where I want to. Then I go to adjusting the scale. And what I do, like say, for example, let's just say you want to have 100 pounds of left rear bite. When you got it on the scale, it's got 25 pounds of, well, it's in today's world, it's not going to happen. Let's just say you got 250 pounds of left rear bite in the car, and you only want 100. Well, what we got to do is we got to just transfer the weight load from spring to spring in a diagonal fashion of the corners. So in other words, with the left rear being real heavy, what I would do is I would put a couple turns down on the right rear, take a couple turns off the left rear. Now my right heights are going to be off a little bit, so then that's when I go to the left front. And now I took those 2 turns out of the left rear, so I'm going to put 1 turn in the right front or the left front to kind of raise that back up, take a turn out of the right rear, the right front, and kind of let that go down and go in that fashion of an X. Always, whatever you do on the left front, you do on the right rear, and whatever you do on the right front, you do on the left rear. And you work in that pattern, you'll get the car to the point where the ride heights will come out right and the actual scale numbers will come out right. So once again, keep in mind, left rear weight and rear weight is a fixed item. So the only way you're going to change left side percentage and rear percentage is statically moving a chunk of lead one way or the other. The diagonal is the one that we can adjust by changing from spring to spring. So you could crank on that thing all day long and it's not going to gain any left side weight. If my left side weight's 52%, it's going to stay 52% because that's just what the car weighs. And so you kind of go in that fashion, but always use that cross pattern. Like I said, always do whatever you do on the left front, you do on the right rear. Whatever you do on the right front, you do on the left rear. So you keep those corners working together, and you'll be able to get it to the point where the right heights will come out perfect, and the scale numbers will come out just where you want them to. It's just, there's times where, it was a 3-hour scale session, and scratching my head a few times. But once we got to that point where we kind of know where we're at, it works pretty slick, and it'll get you where you need to be. Mason, what's your opinion of a 1-inch offset wheel on the right front of an IMCA modified? Depends on my driver. If the driver is a driver that runs the car relatively square, kind of go-kartish, so to speak, I like that right front sticking out there. I think it really makes the car, one thing, you gain stability because the front end's wider. It's going to tend to drive better because the front end's doing a little bit more work, because once it's that much wider than the rear end, it really tells the rear end where it needs to go. Now, if my driver is one of those kamikaze pilots that gets the right rear way out in front, then I don't really like it, to the point where if you've got to have the car halfway sideways all the time, to the point where that left or that right front sticking out so far, when you crank it to the right, it's going to try to give you that jacking effect on the left rear. So if the driver's, like I said, if he's real aggressive, I'm not a fan of that. But if he's pretty good where he drives the car relatively straight, I mean, it's not going to be straight, but I mean, there's a big difference between a smooth driver and a driver that's a little more up on the wheel. Okay. RC Greg, he actually did a good job answering the question here. I appreciate that, RC. On IMCA modified, to tighten the car, I've always dropped both right rear bars. I hear some leaving the right rear upper up to keep the drive and side bite in the car. What's your thoughts on that, from heavy to slick? What's your opinion, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys that will flatten that right top rod out to get a little bit of traction, but you're flirting with having that thing like 2-link wheelie and not have no drive angle in it to give you that feel. So it's kind of a balancing act. A lot of guys will keep the angles and spread the bars to get the same sort of feel as taking the right top rod angle out, but keeping the drive angle in it. So when you spread the bars out on the cage, it kind of slows the motion and gives you the same effect, but you can keep the top angle in there to keep that right rear stiffness or spring stiffness through the drive angle. So the right rear is a balancing act. It's a tuning. I would rather tune the right rear than the left rear most of the time. So, but a lot of guys just early in the night they got that up, and later in the night they flatten it out. So whether that's right or wrong, I think there's two ways to do it. So
yeah, I think you're 100% right. It's definitely a driver specific type of a feel. I've always had the feeling that when you flatten that right rear out, like you said, the car is going to roll over and it's going to be a little bit lazy for a second. Once you're up off the corner, it's going to give you more traction. But I actually think it actually hurts mid corner speed because the car kind of gets lazy on you and doesn't want to, like Chad said, spring stiffness. It's you're using that bar to actually create load on that right rear, which is side bite. And then once again, we can't have too much. I mean, you still have to have the car balanced to the point where if you have too much load on the left rear and no load on the right rear, the car's not going to come off the corner right. I mean, it's just, it's just, you're going to lose speed from the apex of the corner to corner exit somewhere in that neighborhood a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, if you tune with the mechanical with the bars, so if you take top rod angle away, but you increase spring rate, you kind of balance out that stiffness again. So it's kind of a driver preference. If you like the two-link feel of the motion, then you just got to increase spring rate. Sometimes it balances back out, and there's guys that are lights out like that.
Yeah, RC running a 2-inch with a 1-inch spacer to keep it out from the hood and tightening the car up. I like that idea. I mean, I think it's definitely, we used to run a 3-inch spacer with a 3-inch wheel with a 1-inch spacer, and we started playing with that 2-inch wheel at the end of the year and felt that actually, once again, just made the car more stable. We never tried the actual 1-inch wheel. That's getting out there quite a ways. But I know a lot of fast cars run that right front wheel way out there. So Dave said the best scaling explanation I've heard. Well, way to go.
Hey, you think that's good? You should sign up for Bob's schools. It gets even better.
Yeah. Well, we try to get as much information as we can. I'm not the most exciting speaker in the world, so sometimes I do see a few heads kind of bobble because my voice is kind of steady, but that's okay. Yeah, we've actually had quite a few people sign up for chassis schools. Sport Mod and Stock Car one, in fact, we had 3 over the weekend. No, 3 over the weekend for the Stock Car school, and I think there was 2 today for the Sport Mod school. Blake wants to know, what's the best way to tighten up a hobby stock on a slick from the center out, already running a 4-inch wheel? That's a great question, Blake.
They can't run wheel spacers, right?
No, they can't run wheel spacers. I would definitely stick my left rear out as far as I could, whatever their rule is to allow me to stick my left rear out. I would definitely do that. Some cars, the problem is we've actually built some offset rear ends for some hobby stock cars, but you got to be a little careful with that because with that right rear, you start getting a 4-inch wheel over there. And if we move the rear end to the left, that wheel's getting into that frame rail over there. And of course, that doesn't work out so well. It's a little hard on tires, but that would be that, and putting a little bit more left rear drive in the car is probably what I would recommend doing. You're pretty limited on what you can actually do. Jason said, did I miss your answer on the question about load stick? And yeah, but I think you probably put that in there after we actually already talked about it. Did you want to go through it again?
You can hit the rewind. Once we're done, you can go back and watch this whole thing live. Well, not live. You can watch it after the fact. I mean, I can go back over it again if you want, but it won't be as good as
all episodes are all capable of, rewatching all the way from episode 1. I don't know, what episode number are we on this weekend?
88, I think, is what it said.
88. Awesome.
Whew.
Yeah. And we're probably in the month of October, we're going to do, our next one's going to be October 9th. And then we're going to only do one in October. And then in November, we'll get back to doing every other week. And in December, every other week. So that we kind of keep people, we'll go through some off-season maintenance and some of that kind of stuff and keep people thinking about their race cars. Because a lot of people are hunters, just like the great Chad Wehrs with this big buck that he got last weekend.
Yeah, now I'm punched out early. Now I need to find somewhere else to hunt.
Mason, thanks. Would you run a 1-inch offset on the right front all night or just for the feature when it slicks off?
Yeah, not early.
Not early, no. Definitely no.
Yeah, if there's grip in the track, you're not going to turn at all.
Yeah, that's going to have so much right rear load in it that front end is not. And when you start sticking it out there there's a lot less weight on that wheel, and so it's just not going to work. So definitely, but when the racetrack is slick and smooth, I like that, moving that right front out. I think it, once again, I think it gains stability. Okay. I had good forward drive Thursday at the Jamboree, but the side bite was non-existent. Which would you do first? More J-bar angle? Put turns in the spring, raising the right rear trailing arm on the chassis? I feel like the right rear is not in the racetrack at all right now. That's a USRA B mod. Well, you were there, Chad. What was the racetrack like?
I thought the racetrack was pretty good, and they said it had grip, but maybe this is the kind of same thing we've been talking about all night. Maybe you just need to suck the right rear in just a half inch or something to get that extra traction on that right side, to get it to tip over and give you that side bite feel you want to.
Yeah, I like your choices of things to do. I would probably put a little bit more J-bar angle in it. That's definitely a plus. Putting some turns in that right rear spring, what that's going to do is that's going to put more load on that right rear tire, which in turn is going to give it more side bite. Raising the right rear trailing arm on the chassis, I would be a little bit hesitant to do that. Because if the right rear doesn't have grip to begin with, you're actually raising it up and it's going to actually have less grip yet. So I don't think I would recommend that one.
I would say one of the biggest differences between the 2-link and the 4-link car is, like we were talking earlier with the drive angle on the 4-link car. Well, when you eliminate the top rod, then your bottom rod on a 2-link car is your drive angle and your steer bars. So on a right rear, when you're tuning that drive angle, when you raise drive angle, as that right rear compresses, it roll steers loose. So that's what you always got to remember is, you think you want to raise that right or the bottom rod to get traction, but it actually is going to roll steer loose, which in my opinion is a greater effect than the drive angle and is going to make you too loose.
I mean, if the racetrack's got grip and it's heavy, that's ideal. That's my first go-to, is raising that right rear lower bar up. But if it's slick, then I stay away from that as much as I can. Okay, Dan, got one of Chad's new ratcheting load sticks. Case is awesome. Bob, thoughts on checking the right rear load on a sport mod with a stick? I've actually never done it.
Well, the rear suspension's a little bit tricky. So you can do it on a stock car and a B mod because they're clamped cars. So the axle isn't on a bearing on a suspension cage. So how you do that, or how we're having guys do that, is you get a set of setup sticks, which we offer, which is basically just a threaded stick that'll be your ride height number. So when you get your car scaled, you're going to have your 4 center to centers on all 4 corners of your shocks. So then you'll build a dummy stick I would build a dummy stick for every corner, because then when you're doing your crash repair, you automatically have your front end set to where you want to set your caster camber and toe on jack stands so you can right back to the track, but that's a whole nother story. But anyway, in the rear with the load stick, if you have the load stick on the right
That's a
side,
good story. We should come back to that.
we'll come back to that. If you have a load stick in the right rear and you have a solid stick in the left rear, which is holding the axle up where it needs to be, and then you bring the load stick to your center to center of your scale, you'll get a number that you can kind of tune off of. And then when you go to the opposite side, you would just put your solid stick that you have set for your ride height of that side. So it's given guys some data to use on the clamped cars. So the stock car guys are using it a lot, and the B-mod guys are using it. But on a 4-lane car where you have the cage rotation, then the arms all have an effect on everything, and we don't get any consistent numbers there. The setup sticks on the front. So my brother was my test dummy, so he taught me how to fix cars real fast. So them setup sticks, you'd have them set up for every corner, and so if he cleared the right front off the car, you could put the right front suspension on, put the sticks on, and I did caster camber and toe on jack stands, at ride height. Or I think at the end there I was doing it at my down numbers. So it's just a one way to, if you crash in the heat race, you need to think of ways to fix that race car as fast as you possibly can, because missing that B main is going to eliminate you from the show, and you don't make any money that way. So I was a crew chief of a guy that unfortunately wrecked some, and we tried to do things as fast as we could, and we learned a lot about fast crash repair, and setup sticks were one of the first things we built for that.
Okay, Steve, what is the different effect of running the right rear bar on the Northern Sport Mod closer to the housing versus lower on the cage? Huge traction effect. You got to be a little careful, and once again, a little is good doesn't mean a lot more is going to be better, because it will definitely tighten the car up. I actually try to run my right rear up one hole above what I would run actually 2 holes above what I run my left rear, because anytime you make an adjustment on the rear end, it's going to have twice the effect of moving it on the frame. So I can still leave it up on the frame and keep my angle so that I still have a certain amount of steer, but the traction up off the corner is by far much better with it being up on the cage or up on the suspension mount. That seems to work out pretty well. And we've had good luck on a real dry slick racetrack. That's definitely my go-to, raising that right rear. I don't lower it on the frame. I raise it on the cage. Robbie, some guys are running up to a plus 300 pounds of bite on an IMCA stock car, 3/8 mile dry slick racetrack. What would you run for left rear side percentage with that much bite? Well, I wouldn't really run a whole lot. I mean, I still would be in that 52% range for a stock car, because with that much bite, you're not going to have a lot of right rear side bite in the car. Personally, and I'm not saying that people aren't doing it, but more than likely, when you get that far off the path, or when you get that far out of balance, you're crutching the car from someplace else. So there's something else that's going on, or that you've got that's you're having to put that much bite in the car to keep the car traction up off the corner. I would be willing to bet that's a car that's toting the left front, more than likely, because it's, you have to have so much bite in it, because it's laying over on the right rear. And, but that's my opinion. I'm not saying there's not some fast guys that aren't running that are fast, because whatever situation or circumstance that they've got figured out, I'm quite sure it's working for them. Normally, that's not a very balanced race car. Drew, what's the best way to keep the right front from unloading too soon on a stock car? The biggest thing is you got to really be careful on shock on that right front. The stock cars are kind of a heavy beast, 2950 or whatever they are. So, and they've got a high center of gravity, so they kind of want to tip over fairly easy the way it is. And so it's going to get over on that right front really quickly a lot of times. So we've actually had, in fact, our normal shock packages, we run a little stiffer compression on our right front shock because of that, especially if the customer is running a softer right front spring. You have to go to a stiffer shock because that soft right front spring is going to let that thing roll immediately. And so, now if you had a stiff right front spring, you'd want a softer shock because the spring is going to do more of the work. But in this situation, more than likely, I would run a stiffer shock. Chad, I use your clamp on the jack bolt bracket. Don't really like having to weld them to keep them from twisting. Is it possible to machine ribs in them? I like the adjustability.
Well, they come with a bolt that you're supposed to drill the tube and run the bolt down into the tube so you don't have to weld it. I don't know if maybe it fell out or you didn't get it, but usually when you get that thing set and you transfer that 1/4-inch hole through the tube, take the clamp off, drill that hole through the tube, and then just run the bolt down in there. As far as I know, they're not slipping. Nobody's ever called and said they weren't slipping when they're using the bolt. So I don't think you should have to weld it, but drilling the hole to keep it from spinning is definitely a must.
Justin said he likes the idea of setting up the front end alignment of the pit lift. Never thought of running it with those setup sticks.
Yeah, for sure.
Running a soft left rear, I think that you recommend to use a 200-pound spring to scale a street stock and then put your soft spring back in it, and then add 200 pounds of preload. Is that correct? And what are you considering soft? 175 below? And what left rear bite number would you shoot for? Also, I remember you guys saying that if you could use spring rubbers, that you definitely use them. Give me some examples of when I could use a spring rubber. Okay, let me go back to the beginning here.
It's a lot.
The running the 200-pound spring, we used to do that just to make it more of a simplified situation, but I don't do that anymore. We've kind of just adjusted our procedures so that we can run that softer spring. Softer spring, 175 is a very common number to use. I know there's some guys running 125s, some guys running 150s. You got to remember you still got a 2,975 pound car that's got to have a certain amount of spring in it to function correctly. And so, sticking a 100-pound spring in a heavy car like that, well, first of all, the spring's only going to last about 2 nights, and it wouldn't work. But I'm not saying it wouldn't work. It would work for a period of time, possibly. But the 175 is a good stock car number, and then a 225 right rear, that 50-pound split seems to work really well. Spring rubbers, let's see, I missed the 200 pounds of preload, and then add the 200 pounds of preload. I just put the preload in it and then try to adjust the car around it, like we talked about with the scale example. Left rear bite, I'm still a 125 to 150 pound guy. I think that's a pretty good balance for that weighted car. You get too much load on one tire, and then you got one tire trying to do all the work, And to have a balanced setup, we need to have all four tires doing the work. And especially the two rear tires, we still need to have right rear up off the corner, because traction in 16 inches of tread is a lot better than 10. Also, remember you're saying rubbers. If you could run a spring rubber now, spring rubber is a little bit of a tricky deal. If you run a spring rubber and you put it in the middle of your spring, you just made your spring a progressive rated spring, because as it loads, it'll load and then it gains as it gets to that rubber. Then all of a sudden it kind of spikes the rate. What I used to do when I run spring rubbers is I would shave off the corner of them so that I could run that thing up into the tight helix of the clear at the one end, the upper end of the spring. And then it still makes it a little progressive, but it's not near as progressive when you go clear to the end, clear to the top of the spring, because it goes into effect right away, rather than in the middle of the spring. It gradually increases, and then once it starts to increase, it actually increases more rapidly. Okay. Michael, IMCA stock car running 2 degrees of caster split currently. Car has big time drive when turned left, but seems to unload some, and I'm losing some drive when turned to the right. Running a soft right front spring, soft left rear spring. Car's pretty good. Picked up a win this weekend. All wheels, cups, bolts, everything. Just wanted to tune this thing a little bit better. What's your suggestion? It's a little hard to say if you just won last weekend.
How do we
I
make
don't
it
want to
better?
give you some advice to take you out of the ballpark here. But, just depends. It kind of depends on the biggest thing that I found with the stock cars is moving weight on them things is a huge effect, because of course you got so much weight in the back of it to get the percentages to come out decent. You can move, if you need a little bit more side bite, moving a 25-pound chunk of weight 10 inches to the right will definitely have an impact on side bite. If you've got plenty of side bite, moving that piece of weight to the left rear will definitely give you more traction off the corner. When moving a piece of weight to the left rear, be very, very careful that you don't go behind if you're going to move it over, don't go behind the fuel cell, or don't go, in fact, I'd actually run it in front of the fuel cell to the left, because what happens is on the left rear, you got to keep in mind, if we're taking a piece of weight and we're moving it away from the right front tire, what's it going to do? It's going to make the right front tire lighter. So then all of a sudden we got good traction off the corner, but we've made it lighter getting in to the point where it's pretty easy to get a push. So you got to be a little careful with that. But that would be my tuning suggestion, is just moving some general weight in a little different direction to see, if you need more right rear feel, or if you need more left rear feel, or what you think could possibly be better.
Talk a little bit about the caster split there and turning, and he's thinking that his caster split is when he's turning in back steer, he feels like he's losing grip when he back steers.
Yeah, that's not a lot of caster split. I always run 3 degrees of split, like 2 in the left front and 5 in the right front. So increasing, even if you went to 2 and 6, increasing the caster split is going to load the left rear a little bit more once with that type of suspension, stock car type suspension. It's going to load the left rear more when you counter steer the car. Mitch, is the hot tire doing the work? No. The cold tire is the one that's doing the work because it's gripping and not creating friction. The hot tire is the tire that's spinning, slipping, and sliding. Yeah, well, just like what Nick said. Thanks, Nick. Michael, feels like the car loses right rear grip when turned to the right.
That's the caster guy, same guy.
Yeah, I would have to say it's you need more caster split would definitely help you there. Definitely make the car a little better. All right, everybody. Well, we'll see you guys again October 9th. Talk about whatever we can talk about, and hopefully you all have a great week, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everybody.
See you, Chad.